Who are some potential trade candidates on the Ravens roster? We talk about that and more next here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And as we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. Of course, we're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube. And we're back. It's a Purple Friday with our Purple Friday guest and former Baltimore Ravens wide receiver and Super Bowl champion, Qadry Ismail. Q, we have a ton to talk about here today on this Friday. How you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. It's amazing because every time you think there's nothing to talk about, there's something to talk about.
And that's why we're here, right? Breaking down the latest news and the latest stories. And we'll talk about early trade candidates for the Ravens in the second and third parts of the show. But Q, starting off here, a couple of Ravens news, I guess even quotes from players. First, let's start off with the news. Jason Pierre-Paul, the veteran pass rusher, visiting the team yesterday. Now, it's been known that the Ravens could potentially be looking for a veteran outside option at the outside linebacker position. You know, Justin Houston, a player that had a tender placed on him, and so that would be around $2.5 million. But Jason Pierre-Paul, very accomplished throughout his 12 years in this league, 91 and a half sacks in 12 seasons. So just 8.5 off of that 100 mark. Q, do you feel like this would be a good signing for the Ravens? And do you feel like if Justin Houston maybe doesn't work out and the Ravens want to add a veteran, Pierre-Paul would be a guy to fill that void for them?
Well, we know this to be true, that Jason Pierre-Paul, JPP, as he's commonly referred to, is a guy that has a ton of production, has kind of slipped a little bit with an injury from last year, not quite as dominant of getting to the quarterback when he was down in Tampa. But I still think that if his shoulder is healthy, he would have an opportunity to come in, fit in, and I think play a significant role in this Ravens defense that so desperately need pass rushers. It speaks to the level of, you got some guys that are injured and kind of banged up, and not that saying that they won't be back healthy, not saying that they're, needing camp bodies, because clearly he's not that guy. He's certainly a regular season guy who, you want him to come in and play well, be productive. But I think with, Justin Houston, if it is both of them, which probably doesn't seem likely, that'd be something to see. But we've seen in the past where the Ravens, they've made a play for a veteran guy. And, JPP, I would be curious to see what it looks like as far as him and the Ravens when it comes to the bottom line, the monetary fit. If it fits for both sides, they feel both comfortable with it, then I think it'd be cool to see him on the team. I think he could really help, as far as mentoring some of the young players. And when I say mentoring, I'm talking about showing that this is how you do it. Those are the little things that I think really helps your ball club get better when you get in guys like JVP who can kind of show some of the young guys the tricks of the trade.
Yeah, and Pierre-Paul was a Pro Bowler in 2020, just 2 years ago. So he still has great production. You mentioned the production did slip a little bit because he wasn't as healthy as I think he would have liked to be in 2021. But you mentioned both there, Q, and it's an interesting idea having both Justin Houston and Jason Pierre-Paul. You said it didn't seem super likely. Do you feel like it'd just be, I don't know, too much at the position, assuming everybody's back healthy, or do you just think with money it might not work out, or what's kind of your thought process behind having both versus not having both?
Yeah, so when you have veterans, obviously you're talking about veteran minimum. That comes into play. So you have money and who does what. I think there's a little bit of are we playing our guys that we drafted? Not saying that John Harbaugh isn't opposed to playing the best player. We've seen him do that. But I think John and Eric feel like they need the young guys to be their own person. So there's that weird, delicate balance of, hey, I want to be my own person. I want to grow in, the offense, the defense, whatever the position might be. And if you have too many veterans, you kind of get a little lost in the shuffle. So there's that fine line of having veterans with a mix of young players. You want young players because you can play them more. They're fresher. They're not going to be requiring those quote-unquote vet days that you get throughout the year when you give guys days off to recover their body. So it's a really fine line between, having too many veterans and having young guys on your ball club.
Right, and I think it also comes down to like a trust factor thing, like for players like Jaylen Ferguson, who hasn't shown, I think, what the team and himself would have liked to show throughout his first couple of years here. So how much do they trust Jaylen Ferguson in a situation where, David Ojabo doesn't come back until midway or even doesn't play the whole year, when Tyus Bowser doesn't come back? Can they trust him in a bigger role, or would they feel more comfortable with a Justin Houston who has the production, or with a Jason Pierre-Paul who has the production? I think it is that fine, delicate balance. So I definitely think they should add at least one veteran, whether it is Houston or Pierre-Paul. But I think the notion of two is very interesting to me. But something else that was interesting was Willie Snead and Des Bryant popping back up, some former Ravens wide receivers, talking about a very controversial figure throughout the Ravens fan base in offensive coordinator Greg Roman. And Willie Snead talked a bit about the Ravens offense and compared it a bit to the Saints offense. And then Des Bryant chimed in too. So I'll read just a couple things out here. And Snead, when talking about the stuff about Steve Smith ranting on NFL Network about the offense, and said that, Steve Smith was speaking for several Ravens. He was asked that question, and Willie Snead responded and said, yeah, it's tough when we're comparing Greg Roman to a Sean Payton on offense, or Greg Roman to a John Gruden type offense. It's like night and day. There's a lot more creativity in the passing game. If the Ravens had more creativity in the passing game, I think they put more emphasis on it during the season. I think more receivers would be open to coming. And then also talked about how, that's why the Ravens always draft two receivers early. They keep them young, and talked about how the offense, almost like the system, pushes guys away a little bit. And then Des Bryant responded to that and said, drafting a guy like Lamar should be easy to build around. And he remembers watching Lamar in college and that ability translated to the NFL, and said that, quote, I always thought it should have been easy to figure out. So Q, a lot of stuff to unpack there from those two former Ravens wide receivers. And it's interesting because there are definitely faults to Greg Roman's offense. He's not a perfect offensive coordinator, but the system is very different from what we're seeing across the NFL in terms of all these high-flying, pass-heavy offenses. The Ravens' offense is much more run-oriented, but as Willie Snead and Des Bryant are talking about here, building around Lamar Jackson is a bit more different in that offense because of the pure run-heavy nature of it. And do you think that does push guys away because it is such I'll call it a special system?
So we know this to be true. The Ravens offense is one where Greg Roman came in. He was with Harbaugh out in the 49ers. They had big offensive linemen. They had a guy named Colin Kaepernick. It took them to the Super Bowl. We also know that Greg Roman was up in Buffalo. He had some success, but it wasn't quite the commitment to the run, and it was just okay. When he came here, I think it was, hey, listen, you're going to be all or nothing with me. We're going to obviously feature, at that time, Joe Flacco, see what he got left in the tank, and then we're going to transition over to this young, talented stud player in Lamar Jackson. They did. Bully ball is what it is. And, yeah, the guy that is the go-to receiver plays tight end, Mark Andrews. He got the big contract. He got the big bucks. Sure, you could talk about drafting young players, and I'm sure Miles Boykin or even Hollywood, felt like maybe they could have been more productive, but they weren't. And sure, a lot of blame goes to the way in which they were developed or weren't developed as far as receivers were concerned. However, you know what you got when you're talking about Greg Roman's offense. It is tight and heavy. I don't know what else to tell you. Why do we keep saying the same thing over and over again, hoping for a different result? When it comes to veteran players, yeah, sure, some veteran guys want to be out there and, catch XYZ balls and be the man and kind of, re-kickstart their career, but you know what you got. I think, the New England Patriots, clearly when they had Tom Brady, they didn't have a who's list of receivers, but there were times where they were just run first offense. And then obviously Tom being Tom, and Tom took over. Well, Lamar Jackson, he doesn't have quite the Super Bowl or playoff resume that Tom has, but he does have that dynamic, explosive capability, that charisma, and that uncanny ability to win games. The regular season, he's won tremendous amount of games. This is what Greg Roman's offense is, and not many teams can match up against it. Now, again, you go back to the Miami game that we talked about, the two different Miami games. One in the opening of the season, what was it, 2019 or 18, where they were just crushing guys, running up and down the field, big play after big play. And then, of course, last year's, primetime game where the Miami Dolphins like, all right, bet we're going to go ahead and zero blitz you and see what you do. And they just didn't get it done that time around. So, Dez has a right to complain. I'm sure Willie felt some type of way as far as his usage and going from, a great place like a New Orleans where it was wide open. It ain't wide open. That's just what you got to expect. And yes, if you are a receiver in this offense and you're a veteran, you better just know that, look, I got to go out there. And they said, win the 50-50 balls. I mean, any offense, you got to win the 50-50 balls. I think sometimes you can scheme guys open for sure, and it does make it easier. But your skill set should be one where you're winning those 50-50 balls the majority of the time.
Yeah, and I think when Snead was asked if Steve Smith was talking for several former Ravens wide receivers, I mean, maybe Steve Smith was anyone on that rant, but at the same time, I think some of these receivers knew what they were signing up for when they signed on with the Ravens, which is you're playing with a dynamic, great quarterback with Lamar Jackson, but the offense is one that is more run heavy, so you're not going to get as many targets as you would in Kansas City or somewhere else that throws the ball 40, 50 times a game. And that's just what it is. So does that, kind of shoo away wide receivers and say, oh, well, I don't want to go there because if I have one shot to revive my NFL career, so I want to do it in a place where I'm not going to catch a lot of balls, maybe not. But at the same time, if you want to play in that system, I think it does benefit to a certain extent because there are opportunities to catch the football, but there just might not be as many. And some receivers value that over winning. Other people value every player has different values. Some value catching footballs in terms of numbers, like 100 catches. Others value the winning aspect, so they'll just be a part of the team. So I think it does take a certain type of receiver to play in Baltimore and Greg Roman's offense. I don't think that's a wrong point, but at the same time, the Ravens, as John Harbaugh said, they're not going to beg players to go there. If a guy wants to come to Baltimore, that's awesome. But if not, John Harbaugh said they'll be looking forward to lining up against them on Sundays. So I still think, again, I think Greg Roman is a good offensive coordinator. His system is good, but there are clear areas to improve in that system to, I think, make it a more balanced offense. But at the same time, this is a run-first team. They have proven that bully ball works. And I think that if you're a receiver willing to play in the offense, the rewards will come. It just might not be in the form of, 100 catch seasons, 1,000-yard seasons, 10 touchdown seasons. I think that's more in the form of winning, where if you play your role, you'll still get targets, you'll still get footballs, but you're right. Mark Andrews is the top target on this team, and he's a tight end. So I think it's a very niche offense for receivers when you're looking at just who wants to play there. But I think for Greg Roman in particular, he's a solid offensive coordinator, but there are areas to improve in that offense. So again, I've been very neutral on the topic in terms of, look, he's a good offensive coordinator, but at the same time, there are ways that he can improve. There are things that he doesn't do particularly well. So it's kind of the balance in terms of, this is a run first team. If you're a wide receiver, do you want to go to a run first team? That's a decision they have to make. But at the same time, I guess it does kind of push guys away a little bit, the guys who want to have those big number seasons. But we'll head into our first break here on Locked On Ravens. Still a ton to talk about. When we get back, we'll be diving into some potential trade candidates for the Ravens on the offensive side of the ball on their roster. So be sure to stay tuned. Still a ton to talk about here on the show. First, though, I do want to tell you a bit about Bet Online. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your sports betting stats and info. You can find all the latest sports developments, news, and odds, including the basketball NBA Finals with the Celtics and the Warriors. You got the Hockey Conference Finals going on, Major League Baseball, and of course, all the latest fighting news from MMA to UFC and boxing as well. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more. That's the website today. Use your mobile device to learn more about the trend and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. We're back here. Our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with Qadry Ismail. And again, thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen to the day. And be sure to also check out our listener survey. If you fill that out, you have a chance to win one of 10 $100 Ticketmaster gift cards. To take that survey, go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey. And thanks for your help on that. But Q, let's dive into the trade talk here. Early trade talk, I would say, because we're still a couple months out from preseason, from cut down day and everything. But there are some candidates, early ones that I see on this Ravens roster that the Ravens could potentially look to move off of if there's just a surplus of talent at that position. And as a lot of teams know, you can't keep everybody and you have to let go of some talented players. So Q, starting on offense, one of the positions I look at is running back. The Ravens have J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. Hopefully those guys will come back fully healthy. Tyler Beatty, they drafted in the 6th round. They signed Mike Davis. They have a couple other guys. Right now with personnel, what they have on the roster right now, I assume they would keep 4 running backs. And my picks right now would be J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, Mike Davis, and Tyler Beatty. So that leaves a guy like Justice Hill on the outside looking in. So Q, do you feel like Justice Hill is a potential trade candidate when you're getting down to August in the final days before cut down, where the Ravens could potentially say, look, we're going to keep these 4 guys. Justice Hill is going to get cut for nothing. We might as well trade him to a team that could use him for some value. Or do you feel like they, with J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, that uncertainty, they could keep him around and just say, just in case, they would keep him there?
Yeah. So, Kevin, one thing I know to be true, if you heard, Eric DeCosta last year, he was saying how you're always concerned about your roster because at any moment, a strength can be an immediate weakness. We saw that last year. The big thing that we saw last year was when the roster or the cupboard was just full of defensive backs, and they traded the one gentleman away to New England. Well, what happened then after that? You had all those injuries. Those injuries kind of came about. You were just scrambling. It took an effect on your salary cap. And so you burned through so much just to field a team. You got 2 guys on injured reserve. They're scheduled to come back and all that. But I promise you this, the Ravens are not going to rush back 2 young studs, J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. They're going to take their time. Eventually, they're going to put them back out in the field. If I am them, I'm not even entertaining anything when it comes to Justice Hill going anywhere. And so the whole staff has to be in lockstep with guys who are going to finagle some things. Part of the finagling is going to be defensive back and running back. Those are the 2 positions that were hit hard. Let's not play with fate. Let's figure somebody else out, another position somewhere else. But we're going to make sure when the guys are healthy and ready, we'll make those roster decisions. But I don't see it early on, Kevin. I really don't.
Yeah, it is. Again, we talked about the delicate balance of stuff. You have to really account for the injury aspect because nothing is guaranteed in terms of, this player is going to play the full season. Football is a sport with just, one snap, one wrong movement. Everything could come crashing down. So you have to keep the depth intact. But I think it's interesting when talking about players who you could maybe sneak on the practice squad if they get cut versus guys who obviously, if they were to be released by the team, they get immediately snatched up because of that potential and that talent. So Q, and moving to tight end, the Ravens have 4 guys who I think are locked to the roster, and Mark Andrews, Nick Boyle, Charlie Kohler, and Isaiah Likely. Josh Oliver would be that 5th tight end now, in my opinion. I feel like if Oliver were to get cut by the Ravens, he would get swooped up and he wouldn't make it to the practice squad. Now, maybe some way he does, but that would be a situation where maybe the Ravens are saying, well, we're not going to get anything back for Josh Oliver if we let him go. Would that be a situation where maybe you look to trade him right before cut down day to be able to get value back for him, assuming he's obviously wouldn't make the roster in this situation?
Yeah, Josh Oliver is a kind of an interesting because you saw some flashes and you felt like, wow, this guy, he plays. There's some inconsistencies, but there's some explosiveness. How about that? And I think to be fair to him, again, you're talking about a full tight end room. I thought they were trying to. Because when Lamar went down, the offense certainly changed, and he had a different role, if you will, when looking at his play last year. I think the roster where Nick Boyle, he's talking about himself being back healthy and all that. But again, you got to take it slow. I would, again, throw caution to the wind. Normally I'm all for value, value, value. What's in front of you right now is the most important thing. And I think fielding a healthy team is the most important thing. And I think for Josh Oliver, it better be something good for me to consider letting him go. Otherwise, yeah, I'm trying to do my best to sneak him on the practice squad and hope that during the preseason there's no one else that's truly looking for their tight end depth or whatever, so they don't have to come and pillage our practice squad.
Yeah, and Q, I think also something that's interesting is the offensive line, because we did see the Ravens trade Ben Bredeson to the New York Giants, a guy who wasn't going to make their roster. And so obviously they thought, hey, look, we can get value for him. They ended up trading him, and I believe it was a 6th rounder, maybe another pick in there for a 4th. They got that value. So Q, there are a couple other guys on this roster I feel like could be in that Ben Bredeson role when you're talking about offensive line, guys who could maybe not win the starting left guard job and potentially be on the way out. Maybe that's a Ben Powers, maybe at center, looking at Tristan Colon. Do you see any offensive linemen that could potentially be traded a couple days before cut down day just because the Ravens don't have enough space to keep them on their roster, and those guys wouldn't be able to get on their practice squad because they're too talented?
Yeah, no, I hear you with Powers. Cologne, I'm not too sure about. We'll have to see what the preseason games hold, because that's where, you start to look at your roster. You're going to have other scouts looking at their roster plus your roster. You get a bigger picture once the happenings of the speed of the game kind of picks up its tempo. Right now, it's glorified running around in your underwear. It's the underwear Olympics. Part 2. Part 1 was the combines and the testing. Now it's part 2. You're just running full speed, and there's no collisions in a true football sense, but you can, either make it or break it. In the breaking element of it all, it's, all right, we know we got depth here. Where are the holes at in other teams, and can we go to them or expect them to come to us? An offensive line, typically, that's where you can make your hay as far as, again, sneaking them on the practice squad and or not sneaking on the practice squad and being aggressive and trying to create a trade.
Right, and there are teams all around always looking for offensive line help. And for the Ravens, they have stacked their roster now very deep at a lot of different positions. So there could be some of that, this one guy we know is not going to make the roster. So it's either the question of, do they want to try to sneak him on the practice squad and take that risk? Or is there an opportunity for them to trade a guy like a Ben Powers for a 4th round pick, assuming he doesn't win that job? But again, you're right. We're still a couple months out here. Stuff that we're just speculating on right now in terms of who could win out, lose out on some of these jobs, and potentially be up for trade here on the Baltimore offense. We'll head into our final break. When we get back, we'll flip the field, talk about the defensive side of the ball and a couple trade candidates there. So be sure to stay tuned. Still a ton to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. We're back here. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Allshaker still here with Qadry Ismail. And Q, on the defensive side of the ball, I think there are a few names that continue to pop up for the Ravens in terms of potential trade candidates. One of them being defensive lineman Derrick Wolf, someone who there's just been a lot of uncertainty surrounding Derrick Wolf and what's going on with him. The Ravens bringing in Michael Pierce and Brent Urban and drafting Travis Jones, bringing back Calais Campbell too. They're very deep at the defensive line position. Derrick Wolf played phenomenal football in 2020, was one of the best run stoppers in the NFL, but missed the 2021 season with the injury. And now, isn't it OTAs at the moment? And there's, again, just that cloud of mystery around Derrick Wolf. So where are you in terms of if Derrick Wolf could be traded? Because post June 1, he saves the Ravens a little bit of money, assuming he would be traded.
Yeah, I think we got to figure out how he put that bear on his back and carried it. If we can figure out the bear, then we can figure out whether or not Derrick Wolf is going to be healthy. Because if he's healthy, sure, he's productive, and you don't just trade away talent, and you want that production. Now, if he's not fully healthy, or there's some question, or if there's any level of he's running his course here, let's just go ahead and develop these other guys and give them reps and opportunities that he would potentially take, then that's where they're going to go. I don't know. Derrick Wolf, again, talent there clearly. Mentally, if I am Mike McDonald, and I'm seeing other guys grab a hold of my defense and the whole nine, I'm like, do I really need him? I know I got some young, talented guys that I think could make an impact with my defense more than waiting for a guy who can pick up a 300-pound bear.
And Q, what would you want to get back for Derrick Wolf if you're the Ravens? Is this like a 7th round pick situation? Is it more of like a mid-round selection? Where are you looking in terms of if the Ravens were to trade him, what they would be getting back in that deal?
I mean, I think if you got a 7th, you're kind of feeling good. Maybe some conditional pick. You feel like, hey, he's productive. He just wasn't productive here. But what if he turns around and plays extremely well? Then if he does, our conditional pick kind of it moves up the board a little bit more to a higher pick. I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, and it is really just like a literal tale of 2 seasons for Derrick Wolf in Baltimore. Had that great year in 2020, then didn't play at all in 2021. And now we're here talking about a potential trade of a player that, again, was very productive in that system in 2020. So, again, like nothing for certain. Yep. Yeah, nothing for certain. But I know that bear picture got a lot of traction. Bobby Trossett, well, Derrick Wolf posted the picture, obviously, but Bobby Trossett posting it on Twitter got a lot of traction there, definitely. But Q, I know a player that a lot of people have talked about as a trade candidate, but don't want to talk about as a trade candidate is Chuck Clark, the safety. And this is a player for me. I've been very consistent. I'm team keep Chuck Clark, but I think it depends on what Chuck Clark wants. There have been rumblings about potential unhappiness, whether it is contractually or positionally. Again, a lot of unknowns there, but in the event that Chuck Clark decides, hey, look, I don't want to necessarily be here anymore because of X, Y, or Z, is that a situation where you think the Ravens would go the route of Hayden Hurst or Orlando Brown or Marquise Brown and help him get somewhere he wants to be? Or would they keep him and kind of try to put him in their defense and just hope everything works out?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a scenario where it would be purely like Orlando Brown and, Marquise or Hayden Hurst. I think there's a real big affinity for what he brings to the table. I think at the same time, from a green dot perspective, and that green dot's on the defensive player who's going to be calling plays. It's on his helmet. So there's a lot of responsibility there. They talked about, maybe potentially put into other guys. So you're not in a bad light. But everybody keeps talking so highly of him. And, I just think that that's saying something. I think that, it's keep. I'm absolutely team keep Chuck Clark. That's just the bottom line. Keep Chuck more than you think about letting him go. That's just what I think needs to happen.
Right. He is so important to what the Ravens do in multiple different aspects. He is a leader. He is a glue guy on this defense. Is he the best player on the defense? No, he's not the best player. But I think when you look at just what happens, there's a lot of different stuff that I think goes on with, keeping safeties on this roster. 3 of them, 3 very, very, very talented safeties where I think at the end of the day, regardless of if one isn't a starter, right? Quotations, a starter, that doesn't mean he's all of a sudden going to be playing 10% of snaps and a backup. He's a starter, but not really a starter because he doesn't have the starter label. So for Chuck Clark, he's a player that I think this team should absolutely keep. But again, I think it does come down to Chuck Clark. And every position or every situation was different in terms of Orlando Brown and Hayden Hurst and Marquise Brown in terms of why they wanted out. And if Chuck Clark does want out, the Ravens, I think at that point would have to think to themselves, is this a situation where we can kind of smooth things over with him? Or is this oh no, like we're going to have to get rid of him? So I think at the same time, as much as I do want to keep Chuck Clark and want him to stay on this roster because of how important he is, I think if he wants out, then maybe the Ravens just have to respect those wishes as they have done with so many other players over the past couple of seasons here in terms of, Hayden Hurst and all those different guys. But Q, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for hopping on with me here on the show, talking about some of these trade candidates, Greg Roman and Jason Pierre-Paul. Again, never a dull day with the Ravens.
Never a dull day. We just know this, that thank goodness we are not over in Cleveland talking about the Cleveland Browns, because they went from offseason Super Bowl champions to straight up like last place finishing. We don't even know who they're going to even have under center. It's really that bad over there. So And Tyson Williams not on. Who's your boy that is no longer on the team either? Yeah, he ain't here either. We don't even know his name.
I think we do, and that name is Devonta Freeman, and I will have
What?
you put respect on that name in Devonta Freeman. It may be a late veteran addition to the Ravens in the offseason, no, but yeah, Cleveland has a lot going on over there, and it'll be interesting to see the suspension that Watson gets. I mean, obviously, if and when it all comes down, I mean, I'm thinking it's coming, but obviously, a ton of stuff still to figure out there. But for now, the Ravens could have potential trades coming on down the line, and maybe August, maybe September, maybe or even during the trade deadline, we'll probably be talking thank you about maybe guys they could add to this roster for sure. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. When we get back here on Monday, we'll be diving into more Ravens talk after our 2-day break. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you on Monday.